Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I'm your host, Richard Costello, and today I'm excited to welcome Barrett Sprowson, Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Peterson. Barrett has been at the forefront of real estate sales and marketing in Vancouver, leading teams and driving the success of some of the city's most notable projects. Throughout his career, he's been responsible for over $2 billion in revenue and the sale of more than 3,500 units. Barrett brings a data-driven approach to market analysis, pricing strategy, and product development, helping shape projects that meet both investor and end-user demand. Before joining Peterson, Barrett was VP Sales at Intracorp, and he has held senior roles with Magnum Projects and Sotheby's International. He began his career in resort real estate with IntraWest, selling condominiums at Panorama Mountain Resort, Whistler, Vernon, and even Las Vegas. Outside of real estate, Barrett is a dedicated father, outdoor enthusiast, and director of a kids camp. Whether he's mountain biking, snowboarding, or trying to keep up with his 3 kids, he brings the same passion and energy to both work and play. In our conversation today, we'll dive into the challenges and opportunities in today's market, the importance of pre-sales, and how sales and marketing strategies need to adapt in a shifting market. Barrett, welcome to the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Richard. Stoked to be here. You made that sound so bougie. I promise it has not been that glamorous.
Okay, well, we'll find out more about that. So let's start at the beginning. Maybe what can you tell us? What drew you to real estate sales, and how did your journey evolve from IntraWest to leading major urban sales programs in Vancouver?
Yeah, good question. So I never really planned to go into real estate. I always joke that it's kind of luck and a friend that got me in the door. So I was on track to be a software sales guy. That's kind of what I had in mind, something kind of, software things. And a friend of mine, Brendan Mann, convinced me to go up to Panorama for a launch. They suddenly needed a human. That's a funny story that maybe for another time. But that time I didn't, I thought that east was hope. Hope was about as far east as I knew existed. And I thought that, 2 years on a ski hill selling real estate, what could go wrong? And if the worst case scenario, a little South African could have a good time skiing for a couple of years and learning some things. So that's what kind of got us going. And after my first launch, I was kind of hooked. And so that was that. And, I would say that Panorama in the Kootenays was no Whistler in terms of the volumes and the number of people coming through the system. But I kind of got my hands dirty and learned from the ground up. So that was kind of what got me in.
Barrett, how did things evolve then from the mountains to the city?
Yeah, so basically, I spent about 5 years bouncing. We called it chasing launches. So I was kind of chasing launches from project to project, and that took me from kind of Panorama to Whistler. Then I had a project got delayed, so I ended up in Vernon doing a project in Vernon, and then an opportunity came up to go and do a project at Lake Las Vegas in Nevada, and so I ended up going down to Vegas for about just under a year, and so that was good and bad timing. So I got there about 4 or 5 months after I landed. The signs started coming that the world was going to not be the same. So go back to financial crisis time. And so what was supposed to be 2 project launches turned into 1 project launch, turned into a launch that then got delayed and cancelled. And so at that point, I'd put on my resale hat and started doing kind of resales in the community. And then at about 11 months, my wife and I looked at each other and said, "What are we doing here?" We went back to Vancouver. So at that point, my oldest son was 18 months old, and we thought, it's time to kind of get back to where we want to be. And that's where the opportunity with Sotheby's International Realty Canada came up, and so I joined them on project marketing. So we were doing mostly resort kind of stuff at that point. So I came on to do a project in Squamish called Red Point, which we launched and then also ran into some troubles and has recently, it's funny, it's actually, I drove past on the Sea to Sky recently, and the project that I launched in 2007 that then got cancelled and because of issues with the city in Squamish, is now relaunched a few years ago. Kingswood Capital bought it on stream again, and is now under construction, and it looks very much same to the thing that we envisioned and kind of worked on together in 2007. So it's really cool to see that like full circle, 15 years later. But that's what kind of got me back into Vancouver. And so then I spent 5 years with Sotheby's doing projects in and around BC, mostly in the recreational industry, and that got absolutely decimated by the 08-09 financial crisis. And so in 2011, I joined Magnum Projects and I started working with George, and with George Wong. And that's where I really got cut my teeth in the urban world. So it was a very different experience coming from a little bit of a slower environment to then joining the kind of more the faster paced urban kind of sales and marketing real estate world. So, and really I just haven't looked back, kind of loved it from day one.
So having worked in a mix of like resort and luxury and obviously the high-end urban real estate, like how does selling a resort condo in Whistler, for example, compare to launching a tower in Metro?
Yeah, good question. They are completely different animals. I would say there's a common thread, and particularly from how my role has evolved over time. And the common thread probably is the relationship piece, in that, on one hand, in the resort world, you're dealing with a product that's completely discretionary. Nobody needs a second or a third home or a ski condo. And so that's why I think in 08-09 it got decimated, because no one really needs it. And so it took a long time to come back. But basically, on the resort side, I built really great friendships and relationships with all kinds of different people. I had clients from Australia, Hong Kong, plenty of Brits. When the pound was 2.2 to the dollar, that we really paid attention when a Brit walked through the door in one of our PCs. So that was kind of a fun thing. On the other side of the equation, in the Metrotown, like taking the Metrotown condo for an example, you're dealing with, it's kind of way more grounded. The fundamentals are more solid. There's a real, there's a buyer who's, whether they're going to live in it or rent it, or maybe they're buying it for their kids. We see that a lot. Parents helping out a kid. You're dealing with real humans and real homes, and so that there's a kind of rewarding piece to that is really great. And I would say on the Metrotown, like taking that example, you're building relationships with realtors. A lot of it is you're building a long-term relationship with a realtor, and that's where I've found my success and kind of got a lot of reward out of that. Is I respect what realtors do and I respect the community, and so that process, it's much in the same way as the clients from all around the world. I have realtor clients that are from all kinds of different walks of life, and I would say realtor partners, is a better way to say that. But it's the same thread. So I get a lot of reward out of that, and I think that's probably if I think about a commonality, we're all humans and we're driven by very similar things. And so whether it's a resort thing or a Metrotown urban-y thing, we have similar wants and needs at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to kind of the realtor partners in a moment. But if I can jump to the current day, so you're VP Sales and Marketing at Peterson, and Peterson has long been known as a family office with a really strong track record in real estate investments and partnering with well-known developers, and also owns a significant income-producing portfolio. But more recently, the company has taken on a more active role in self-performing development projects. So Could you share a bit about this evolution, what it's like to work at Peterson, and also what projects are in the pipeline?
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. So I think the reason I'm here is because we took this turn towards kind of self-performing things and getting back into being leading developments. And so that's really over the last kind of decade, that's how my skill set has evolved to kind of being involved in with projects right from the very beginning all the way to the end, and kind of being involved with programming them and kind of making good early decisions so that they're right when you hit the market and then hopefully right when people move in. So I think being able to do that at a shop like Peterson, where we do have a substantial portfolio, is really great. So I've taken all these things I've learned over the years and being able to kind of apply them today. And so we have, like you said, we have two kind of buckets of projects in our pipeline, and one of them is there's a rental bucket for purpose-built rental, where we're taking either buildings that we own that are old and need to be refreshed and rebuilt, re-envisioning them under new kind of zoning guidelines, or where we bought sites that will have purpose-built rental for them. And then the other side of the equation, we've got the strata buildings, like the condo buildings, that'll be for sale, and going through that process. So it's a very exciting time for us, where we have a startup vibe but with resources. So it's really great to be in an environment where we're kind of get it done mentality, but we're also we're starting to build processes and systems and that kind of thing, so that we can be more efficient given the amount of product we have coming down the pipe. So it is definitely a very exciting time for us, and it's a great time to be involved. And the team is very strong. So Peterson has, most people don't know this, but for the last 4 years we've won a Top Employers in BC award. It's also great to be part of an organization that already has that kind of a foundation. So we get bolted into that as the kind of development arm. And then I would say from things in the pipeline, we've got 2 projects on the west side that are coming soon in the Oak Ridge area, and then we also have our project Ashley, which is also in the Oak Ridge area, and then Frame on Kingsway in Vancouver. So we've got a number of different things in different stages of the pipeline, but very excited about the Vancouver projects. And then of course, be remiss if I didn't mention our large-scale master plan community in Burnaby, which is just near the Stirling SkyTrain station. So we just took full ownership of that project. So that's probably the biggest kind of single master plan that we have on the books. I love Metrotown, and so we have a nice Metrotown project of 2 towers right on Dow and Beresford, right next to the SkyTrain station. So that's right in my backyard. I love it. And then so lots to work on, all in different stages. And so very exciting time to be at Peterson, notwithstanding the weirdness of the world.
And your role at Peterson spans both sales and marketing. What are the advantages of overseeing both functions, and how do you ensure that they work in sync with one another?
I have a cheesy saying, I call it schmarketing, because you never know really when one when one finishes and the other one starts. And I think it works really well when those lines are pretty blurred. So I think that's what I love about overseeing both parts of it, is that you can make sure that those two entities are kind of always talking to each other. And when I see marketing done well, and when I see sales done well, it's largely because those two functions are really closely integrated and are working well together. So I think that's probably the biggest advantage, is that when you're listening to each other and working together, and there's not like I'm in sales and you're in marketing and we never talk, or we send emails to each other and that's it, then I find that's probably where the magic happens. So I think that's, if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's like schmarketing. We're the same group. We have slightly different ends of the scale. You may be doing, one part of that is doing the front end and getting people through the door, and then the other part is closing sales. So I think they've got to just do this.
Coming back to the realtor partnerships from earlier, so while at Intracorp, you developed an insider realtor program. So what was the thinking behind it, and how has it perhaps influenced how developers yourselves at Intracorp engage with realtors?
Well, I think the genesis for that was our pipeline at Intracorp had gaps in it. So it's often in our industry, it's really hard to have projects line up perfectly so that they all follow each other or are happening in parallel all the time. So what we find happens is you need if you're constantly reaching out to someone when you need them, that's not a great relationship place to start. So what we determined we needed to have some kind of a program in place so that we could create a framework for interacting with realtors in an effective way that didn't have us just picking up the phone whenever we needed them and we had a project to launch. So that was one part of the equation. The other part was just we went on and asked realtors, if we were to do this, what things do you care about? And the things we heard back was transparency, like treat us, we don't really care what the rules are, just tell us what they are and be transparent about it, and then we can deal with whatever your rules are. We really want great projects and great locations, because at the end of the day, that realtor is holding the real estate with their client, and at the end will be either convincing them that they did the right thing, selling it for them, or walking with them through the whole process. So they want great projects, great locations, and then they want to deal with a developer that's going to do what they promised. So they want to know that the quality that we promised here is delivered there. Those are the most important things. And then way down on the list was commissions and bonuses. And those are the things we think with realtors are the top of the list. But those, when we asked, those are kind of the order of things. So we went about building something that would communicate that. And what I found it did a really great job was it gave us the ability to have a framework and continue building on things so that at every launch or every project or every year, you're not starting from scratch. And so over the years, that group of realtors that we kind of worked with and that bought into our kind of way of doing things probably sold 80 or 90% of the real estate. And if you think about 3,500 homes, that's a lot of homes from a smallish group of humans. And so I think from a business perspective, it worked out for Intracorp, and it also worked out for the agents themselves that were part of that program, and were able to find out about projects early, and they got really we made sure that that when they walked through the home at the end, there was a gift for them for their client on behalf of the realtor, and there was all kinds of little things that I think added up to more than some flashy bonus. That was the genesis and the reason and how it worked, and I think there's probably lots of room for programs like this. They take a lot of work, and they take someone to really believe in it and drive it, which is what makes the difference. Because at the end of the day, it's all about relationship.
So Barrett, data-driven decision-making has been a big part of your strategy. So can you walk us through how you use data to inform things like floor plans, pricing, and your overall sales strategy?
Yeah, well, I think at a fundamental level, I like to try and take the subjectivity out of things. So what I find happens is you get in a boardroom and everyone says, well, I think it's this, and then someone says, I think it's that. So what I try and do with the data is have a foundation of data that can tell us something, and then we can make decisions based around that. So it takes a little bit of that I think, you think out of the equation, and so it makes it, I think what I've found is we're able to get to a better outcome with less conflict and kind of less, takes the ego out of it too. So I think that's a thing. So that's kind of was how I've evolved with the data piece, because I think if you data for the sake of data is not really helpful. It's really how you apply it to your decision making is where it's really important. So I use it for example, in silly things like specifications and what are we putting into these homes. So I say we've got a box, and my job is to figure out like how big should the box be, and then what goes in the box. And so when you could have that conversation about what goes in the box, you can, everybody has an idea about whether we like different kinds of tile, and it's not really about what I like or what about you like. It's kind of what is in the market. So, and what does the market respond to? And that's where I take an audit of everything that's out there, And so we have a really clear idea of what the landscape looks like, and then we can decide where we want to be in that matrix. So I found that to be very effective on kind of with the specification stuff that's not super exciting for everyone, but I really like it. And then on the pricing side of it, it's very much, I've taken a very market-driven approach to pricing buildings. So we look at what is going on in the market, and we take things that have sold and then apply adjustments to that to get to our pricing. And again, that takes out a lot of the, well, that project down there got this per foot, or this is that per, it takes a lot of that out of the equation, so that we're looking at like specifics that are measurable and that you can see in the market, and you can pull exact comparables and apply it to your building. So I think those are generally speaking, it's about taking the subjectivity out of it as much as possible. And then, some of my early teachers would say in the S&P, Sid and Pete, who started the company S&P Real Estate that turned into Playground, which was my first job in the business, they would always say pricing is all about magic and logic. So you've got all the logic that goes into it, and then when you get on the sales floor, then the magic happens and the logic goes out the window, and you've got to just go with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can tell you're in marketing with your description of we've got a box and we've got some things that go in the box. I haven't seen that on any of your posters yet.
Mm-hmm. And you will not.
Yeah.
that is what we call a Barrettism, which Barrettisms don't end up on posters.
To what extent do you consider a company's values when making a career decision or choosing a business partner? The values that we embody at Highview Partners are integral to everything that we do. Be the best, do what's right, force for good, and enjoy the journey. Guide every step of our process and influence our actions and behaviors. This podcast series was inspired by the value, enjoy the journey. This means bringing people together, building meaningful relationships within our industry, and giving back to the communities that we care deeply about. For more information, please visit us at highviewpartners.ca.
All right, so I'm going to kind of turn to the current market and some industry trends. So what day are we? March 12th.
Yes, let's timestamp that.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
And we're challenging pre-sale environment, to say the least. But for those unfamiliar, because some of our listeners, are kind of maybe new to the industry and looking to learn a little bit more about kind of what it is that you do, perhaps you can just explain why pre-sales are so important for development projects.
Well, it comes down to, it's basically, I would say, two things. You're on one level, you're de-risking your project, so you're testing that there is a market. So you think you've got a thing that works and that people will like and that people will pay for at a price that it'll cost for you to build it and make your return. And so you're basically going out and testing that to say, is that true? Because the last thing you want to do is build a thing and then realize nobody wants it, and then that's the risk of building it and then getting there and nobody wants it. So the first thing is you're trying to de-risk your project and do a market test on it. And then the same thing, it's related, but basically you're getting your construction financing. So the bank will only lend, the most optimum thing is if when we sell 65 or 75% of the project, then we get the best bank financing. So the construction financing can get paid for by a bank loan. And then our equity is, we have to put less equity into the project, and therefore the risk is reduced. And so long as we can manage through the construction process, we'll exit the project and everything, the homeowners will get their homes, the bank will get paid back, we'll make our money. And so if you don't meet if there's no pre-sales, if you can't get to that 65%, we're not going to go and build it if we don't think there's a market for it, because we get stuck with something that won't sell, or if the bank won't lend us the money because we don't have enough sales, then we have to build it with cash, and now we're putting all our money into this thing that we don't know, again, whether there's going to be a market for it. So it's really all about getting to a point, because these projects are so big and they cost so much money that you don't want to be writing checks to build a thing that you don't know if there's a market for it. And so that's in a nutshell, that's what it's all about.
You've been in the industry for a while, Barrett.
Indeed.
Does this market downturn feel different from past cycles? Because you've mentioned a couple.
Yeah, this one's hitting differently. We've been in this kind of slump for probably 2.5 to 3 years now, and that is longer than anybody predicted. And I think and this is notwithstanding the weirdness that's coming from south as a result of what's happening south of our border. So that's a whole other thing. So if we go back, like if you go back even to October, November, December last year, the resale market had the best 3 months of sales that we'd had in the last 24 months. And so that, what that was gearing up to be was a potential month-over-month sales increases and some buoyancy coming back to the market. So everybody that, our friends at Rennie were predicting, Ryan Berlin, who's the chief economist at Rennie, was predicting or projecting that we would have like an average year this year, which we haven't had an average year for 3 years. So that means, sales every month being right on the monthly average for that month. Like that would be great compared to what we've had for the last few years, which is the sales volumes for the resale market being below the average for those months on any given month. And so we were gearing up towards, maybe the back end of the year being really great on the pre-sale world, because what we find happens is as resale market ticks over and inventory chews down, then people start choosing, they flip over and they start buying pre-sales, because now it makes sense to buy a pre-sale because I have to wait a little bit longer to get into it and all that kind of thing. So we lag. And so now as a result of what happened south of the border in January now, we are like everything is at a screaming halt. So all that momentum that was building has come to in the resale market. So the impact for us is we need to see that picking up before our sales will pick up. So basically it's slow. It's really different in that it's longer than previous cycles have been. And I would have said we would have been exiting this cycle this year, but now all bets are off. I'm not sure how long it's going to take us to kind of navigate this current world.
And in a time of slowing sales, like where do you and your team spend your time? Like, are there strategies that become more critical in these moments?
But this is where we roll up our sleeves. And we have been doing for the last 2 years. So, this is where all those years in the trenches, selling projects that were in difficult markets come to bear. I look back at my career and the things that really, when I was in it, that really sucked, and I was like, what am I doing? This is where that all pays off, because it's, when I look back and you can pull things from that and know that it's going to change. So I think on one hand, when I wear my sales hat, what salespeople need in today's world is just constant support, because it's really hard. Like when you're day in and day out putting your energy out and trying to maintain your expectancy that somebody could write a deal, and that you've got to maintain that positive mental outlook, that's hard day in, day out when you're being told no, and then the deals aren't coming. So like that's the thing that I find you're having to, or you're wanting to, if you're doing it right, you're wanting to be really supporting your sales team right now. And then on the other side of the equation, on the marketing side of the equation, you've got to be really creative. And so between the two groups, like you've got to be, we're thinking about new programs every 6 to 8 weeks. We're rolling out a new thing. If it doesn't work, we're tweaking it and rolling out a new thing. You got to keep your presentation center fresh. Like you got to have a different vibe in there every 6 to 8 weeks. So when somebody comes back, there's something different. Otherwise, it's just you can't have the same stale flowers sitting on the same vase. You've got to keep things rotating, keep it interesting both for your sales team and for the human that's coming in, because they're going to come back 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times before they write a deal. And so you want to have it seem like things are turning over, even if it's not turning over. So I think those are the kind of things you got to just be super nimble. You got to be constantly rejigging your pricing. You got to be constantly, staying close to your sales team, listening to the feedback. The people that are doing that are going to do okay. The people that are just expecting to, people walk through the door and we do deals, that's not going to work.
With affordability concerns and shifting buyer sentiment right now, like what do you see as the biggest perhaps challenges and opportunities in Vancouver's market?
Yeah, I would say that let's deal with challenges. I think probably the biggest challenge is kind of the level of regulation and policy and the tax extractions at every level of the development process. So every level of government is extracting something along the way. And so I think from a creating affordability perspective, like there's just too many extractions along the way, and that we need to work with our government at every level to either eradicate those or reduce them in such a way that we can crank out affordable, quote unquote, homes. And then when you layer in the construction cost on that, the construction cost is not going to come down. The buildings are getting more complicated. So something's got to give. And for the longest time, the market just kept going up, which allowed us to keep going. And so now that that is definitely, we can't look forward and say the market's just going to bail us out. So something has to give. And I think it has to be on the kind of regulation, tariffs, taxes, that kind of thing. The opportunities, if you're a buyer, this is your time. So if you're thinking about getting into the market or downsizing, this would be your time to. You cannot walk into a presentation center anywhere in the city today where they're not giving you a deal. And so if you're a buyer, you want to have a counter-cyclical approach to things, and when nobody's buying is when you want to be buying. That's where I've seen in past cycles people get ahead and get into the market is when it's difficult. Yeah.
And are buyers more selective than they were a few years ago?
Oh,
how does it impact unit design, pricing, strategy, marketing?
But it really, so they're shopping around. So I think that's healthy when buyers have the ability to shop around and not just take whatever they can get. And so there's definitely a balance there that is healthy. We're certainly thinking about the end user. We always have. So I think it hasn't really changed how we design things, because we've always thought about whether that end user is eventually the tenant of the buyer, or whether they're an actual owner occupier. It's the same. You have the same needs and wants at the end of the day. So we hasn't really changed how we look at things. What is interesting is in some markets we're seeing the smaller homes taking longer to absorb than the larger homes, and that's kind of a shift. We used to see the small things selling right away, and then the larger things taking longer. And that's largely because the investor has stepped to the sideline. But definitely we're thinking a lot about the end user, and we're thinking our strategies are more longer term. So we're thinking about sales cycles that run 24 to 36 months, not 12 to 18 months. So I think that's probably the biggest shift.
So turning to your leadership and personal insight, a big part of your success, Barrett, has been building and retaining high-performing sales teams. So what do you look for when hiring, and how do you go about creating a strong team culture?
What I look for in hiring, I think the first thing there is some experience. So given the types of projects that I've been lucky enough to have and work on, I get to hire people that have a chunk of experience. So firstly, I'm not getting humans that are just starting out, so to speak. So that's on one side of the equation. On the creating a culture side of the equation, I think the number one thing is trust and transparency. So I trust my salespeople. I trust that they're doing the work, that I start off with a position of trust that they're doing the work, that they're putting in the effort, that they're asking the questions. And then that in turn builds trust back to me, and then they trust that what I'm telling them is the truth. And I give them a level of transparency that creates that trust, so they can see. One of the things I've consistently done with my team is I ask them what they want to do. So when we launch a project and we create the strategy, I ask my sales team, how should we do this? And what do you guys think we should do? And I don't just come in and tell them like, this is the plan. And so I get, we come with a framework and we have them react to that framework. And then we ask, what do you think? And then they get to weigh in on the strategy, and then they buy into that and they're part of it. So I think that's been a big thing, and surprisingly it's quite novel, which is bizarre, but apparently that's quite unique. And so I think that the transparency goes a long way, the trust goes a long way. Asking them what they think and listening to them and doing what they say is also a thing that has made a big difference. And I think that those kind of ingredients are helpful. The other thing is I know what it's like to lose a deal on the 7th day of its rescission period and have something that you've been working on for a long time exit the door for no apparent reason. So I know what that's like. I also know what it's like to live on commission and have sales go and come and not know what my next project is. And so I think there's a level of empathy I bring to the table that helps with, again, building trust and creating an environment where people feel like they can come and be real and build their lives.
I've heard there's also some Nando's chicken that occasionally makes its way into the canteen. What's the story there?
Well, there's nothing wrong with a good Portuguese South African chicken. So that is there's food is the way to the heart, and that's not only for a teenage boy.
Barrett, outside of work, you're passionate about the outdoors. You're a director at a kids camp. So how does that balance influence your leadership and decision making?
Yeah, well, I think I find particularly the mountain biking thing keeps my brain kind of fresh and gives me an outlet where I'm not thinking about anything outside of the current activity. So that's quite unique. So I think I've discovered that's a real, like, if I maintain that, if I'm consistent and disciplined about maintaining that, it's good for the brain. The kids camp thing is interesting because I handed over the leadership of that to young humans who are doing an excellent job. Last year was the first year I hadn't been for 7 or 8 years, and I'm going back again this year just with a job. But the leading that was if you think you're a good leader, you should take on a volunteer organization to lead, and then that'll give you a real test of your leadership. So that was, I found that, extracted a level of deliberate emotional intelligence that really, what I took from that into the rest of my world was like, okay, like these are skills that are good to have and to build on and to grow. And then, kids in a camp, like, it's completely different to what I do in my day to day. And so there's a refreshingness to that. I go away for 7 days and I hang out with a bunch of 9 to 12-year-olds and, to have fun and and work with other young people. So, the volunteer group on that camp runs from like 16 to 80. So you have all kinds of walks of life in there, and it's just really rewarding to see kids getting attention and love and acceptance and having a good time. So it's just different.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well said. And I guess we'll finish, Barrett, on a question about your advice. So what advice would you give to someone looking to build a career in real estate sales and marketing?
Well, the first thing I would say is please don't go anywhere just yet, because it's going to look like you might want to. There was a time, like, I had some times in the industry where I was like, why am I doing this? Like, maybe I should just go do that software sales thing. But so stay in. Like, we need the young smart humans and all the talent we can get to figure out the problems that we have to move forward. So stay in firstly, and then the other part of that is not just because it's hard right now, but I found the thing that's helped me most is the consistency. Like if you stay in and you're in and you're consistent, like you will learn and grow and develop, and that almost is more important than immediate successes somewhere. The second thing is stay curious. I think like if you're curious, you can learn anything you need to learn. And I always say like the number one thing is to be curious. Like just ask all the questions. Just anything that, even if it's not in relation to your world. Like I learned a ton about the construction side of the business by just asking questions. Like if there's, oh, why is that? And then people love to talk about why they do things, and then you learn. I know far more than I should know about ridiculous bits of construction and development than probably just enough to be dangerous, but than I ever thought I would, like just because there's a curiosity that is there that I think is the key. And then I also wrote down here, we need the young people, so don't disappear. My two concerns are that young humans will be like, I don't want to do this. And then the older humans that have more experience than I do are like, I'm done, I'm out. So I hope that those two sets of the equation can stick it out here so we can all keep going and learn and keep growing.
Barrett, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you sharing all of this.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for asking.
Oh, no, my pleasure. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.